How usual is this as a tactic to avoid voting on legislation?
Well, it is actually highly unusual, although it has happened before. But I think this demonstrates how desperate the Democrats are to delay this process. And really, that's all it's going to do is really delay things and to try to shine a light on how restrictive this new Texas voting bill is going to be. They're trying to get national attention. They're trying to pressure senators in the U.S. and Washington, D.C. And they're hoping for more grassroots efforts to try to fight against these very restrictive voting laws that have already affected 14 states.
So tell us a little bit about these voting laws, and they really are something of a legacy of the last election that Trump still believes that he won and that there was mass fraud.
Right. And as you mentioned, Trump has been pushing these narratives for many years, even before the 2016 election. That's put a lot of doubt into voters that that these elections are free and fair. And so states have moved to try to restrict voting, and that can include, in the Texan case, banning 24-hour voting or drive-in voting, expanding the authority and the autonomy of partisan poll workers, and increasing the penalties, making it basically criminal to violate any of these rules. But I think the biggest problem, and this is what affects many of these states, are all the restrictive rules on voting by mail. There's this new voter identification requirements in the case of Texas that makes it much more difficult to vote by mail. And if you think that think about the fact that we're still dealing with the pandemic, there are many people who work, there are many people with caring responsibilities. It makes it very difficult to vote in person, particularly because other states, not necessarily the Texan case, will have crazy measures like you can't even give water to people waiting out in line for hours and hours to vote. So we see these challenges as very, very harmful to democracy.
And there was a very big take-up in mail-in votes at the last election.
That's correct. And that was because of the virus, as I mentioned, but also because of the other reasons I spoke about, that it's really difficult to vote on a Tuesday. That's when the election always takes place. And so many people found it much easier to just vote by mail. But a lot of these restrictive laws are trying to even ban voting into a drop box, and just making it more difficult, or shortening the time period that you can vote by mail, or making the laws very confusing for people so that they don't get their vote in time.
Natasha, are we going to see other states trying to do the same thing to avoid this vote? And what can the Democrats at a federal level do to support them?
Well, it may be other states will try to resist some of these voting laws. And we see that there are 3 other states that are trying to get very restrictive voting laws in place, and there could be some resistance to that. But there aren't a lot of tactics that the Democrats can do at the moment, because the Supreme Court several weeks ago basically sided with the Republicans that if there's any thought that there could be fraud, even if there's no evidence of fraud, that they have the right to pass very restrictive voting laws. So what the Democrats are hoping to do is to get the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. Now, they have enough Democrats to do so, but the problem is 2 of those Democrats are pretty moderate and tend to vote like the Republicans do. If they get rid of the filibuster, then they could just pass through sweeping federal voting rights that would basically overrule all of these restrictive attempts by the states. The other thing is there's lawsuits going on. There's even 8 lawsuits right now fighting the voting restrictive laws in the case of Georgia, and they're hoping to really encourage grassroots efforts to protest against this.
Natasha, the state of the states, of many states that are Republican, what does that speak to in terms of the legacy also of Donald Trump and how much of a grip he still has on the party?
Well, he definitely is firmly in control of the party. And this has been shocking to some because of all of the lawsuits against him and all the criminal charges that he could face. But he controls the party, and this has a huge effect because the Republican Party has become increasingly authoritarian, and they are trying to directly target democracy and our democratic institutions. And so this has a long-lasting legacy because you have a majority of Republicans who do not believe that the election was legitimate. They don't believe that Joe Biden is a legitimate president. I mean, that is a real problem. That's the kind of things that you see happening in authoritarian regimes or semi-authoritarian regimes where elections are coming into question and where the party is trying to fight against this by creating an uneven playing field. So I think this legacy it's really, really shocking and scary that this could happen in the U.S. It's a consolidated democracy, but it goes to show how important it is to have clear and fair voting rights and to enable everyone to vote equally and fairly.
So when you say that this is actually doomed to fail, what will eventually happen in terms of some of these votes?
Well, I think that the governor, Greg Abbott, he'll hold another special session. It will be very hard for the Democrats to keep delaying this process. And then what I think will happen is there'll be plenty of lawsuits like we've seen in the Georgia case to fight against this.